Welcome to Tracks to Success, brought to you by Presentation Partners. This is the podcast that brings you inspiring people and their inspiring stories. How did they find their way to the top, and how can their path help you do the same? Here's your host, network broadcaster, executive, and entrepreneur, Kraig Kann.
Right now on this edition of Tracks to Success, you'll hear from one of the rising stars in college athletics, a one-time high school volleyball star who saw dreams dashed, but who found her way into sports marketing, PR, and communications, and has been landing impressive roles ever since. Her professional track began years ago with a book on how to write a press release. She landed an internship with a college bowl game, got an unforeseen break, and bingo, she was off toward the big time. Bigger roles with the Fiesta Bowl, then the Rose Bowl, and then a lead communications strategy role with the college football playoff, where she was called the branding whiz. Now, it's a communications seat at the NCAA, where she oversees brand and strategy with an eye on messaging and presentation. So how does a mom, who admittedly lives off about 5 hours of sleep, find a way to be so buttoned up? And how does an executive who says chaos is her caffeine stay so calm with the pulse of a mammoth organization right at her fingertips? Let's find out. Her name is Gina Lehe. Her inspiring story and this edition of Tracks to Success starts now. Well, Gina, this is a thrill. I met you in New York. We sat on a panel together at the Sports PR Summit. I have followed you ever since and super excited you're joining me on Tracks to Success.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's an honor.
Well, thank you for that. I was going to say, what's the first thing you thought of when you were first asked to join this podcast? What went through your mind?
Why me? That would be my initial reaction to everything. I've been in my industry for 20 plus years, and I enjoy staying behind the scenes for a reason. I'm not really one to be out in front, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and share my story. And part of, as I get older in this career path of mine, part of my giving back is to show and lay the road and groundwork for some folks coming up in the business and industry, and women in particular, on opportunities that are available to them to work in a sports field. And I didn't really have that around when I was coming up, which is fine. I had some really strong, supportive male mentors. But to the extent that I can be an advocate for other females in this industry, I'm all for that. So again, I appreciate the opportunity, but why me was my very first reaction.
Well, we're going to sift through a whole lot of stuff. And by the time we're done, anybody listening is not going to say, why her? They're going to say, good job, great get. So let's talk about the role that you have. We'll start with that, and then we're going to go back in time a little bit as well and kind of talk through your journey. But right now, communications and brand strategy for the NCAA. Big time stuff. We'll get to the journey in a second, but how often do you sit back, and think about the magnitude of the role and the job?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest, I probably should pause and think about it a little more. My biggest, when I go there the most, I guess, is thinking about how I got here. And I know we'll talk about that, but I grew up in California, in the Monterey Peninsula. And when I look outside and realize that I live in Indiana, I'm married to somebody from Indiana, I have 2 children, those life things come into play for me that you could have asked me even 10 years ago, would I ever be living in the state of Indiana? And I would have had a pretty strong reaction to that. So the life situation is one. Working for the NCAA, I quite candidly, there's some people you'll meet and say, well, it was my dream. I never really saw that as a pathway, nor did I ever see college football as a pathway either. So I'm one that really, I don't live by regrets. I take opportunities and make the most of them. And this is just another one of those opportunities that I've been allowed to pursue in my career, and be a part of an environment where I actually make change and bring change forward to the table and create ideas and really have an opportunity to move the needle on perception. And that's the best part for me. I mean, I'm engaged by challenge. You mentioned it earlier, chaos. I am comfortable in that because when you're in chaotic, turbulent environment, and you're a PR professional or a brand professional, that means you have kind of an open slate, an open page, if you will, to create change. So that's exciting to me.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Now I know why you're in communications. You just threw out about 12 of my questions already. Okay. So good job. Way to forecast this whole interview before we really get this thing rolling. So let me just touch on one more thing, because you said, you probably should think about this thing more, kind of where you are, how you got there, all that. And we're going to talk about the opportunities that you provide, not only for yourself, but kind of showing others how they can get there as well, women especially. But is it a pinch yourself moment, maybe once a month or once a year, to say, wow, here I am?
Yeah. And I've only been at the NCAA now for 3 or 4 months. Granted, we've had some fairly significant historic moments already that have happened, and I'm sure more to come. I definitely had pinch myself moments throughout my career working in college football. And ironically, I guess maybe not ironically, but they would all come on game day, because you spend an entire year planning, and you're really kind of amongst a small group of people who really know what's about to happen when that game kicks off. And to see that all come out and play out, there's really no words for the amount of pride and ownership you feel in being a contributor to something of that large of a scale event. I haven't had that at the NCAA per se, as far as an event experience is concerned, but I have made a footprint and a fingerprint on a handful of things at the national office, because I was given an opportunity to come in with a fresh perspective, somewhat of an outsider, not having come from a college campus or a conference. I was bringing in really fresh perspective, and fortunately, those who hired me and those who I work with welcome that fresh perspective. They're willing to take risks, think outside of the box, and engage in conversation that perhaps isn't really along the same format that they've been doing for years, maybe decades. But I think that's, when you bring in people who come from different backgrounds, that's the magic and the beauty that can happen when you collaborate and ideate in different settings.
Yeah, no question about that. I always hear people say the outside the box, and I've been one who's talked about that, but I always believe you take the box, you chuck it in the ocean, and you don't follow the curve set by others. You set the curve that hopefully others will follow by being unique or doing something different or special that hasn't been tried, that kind of becomes your own stamp. So I know you've done that, and I'm going to ask you about some things coming up, but let's go backward, because you already brought it up. California girl, Monterey, totally into sports, right? As a kid, were you the kid, in your circle of young friends that somebody would have said, Gina Lehe, she will end up changing the world. She will be a trailblazer. She will be, running an organization. I mean, what would they have said about you back then?
I'd have to spend some time in thinking how far back somebody would have to go to say that about me. But I don't think it would be unthinkable or unimaginable comment for somebody to say. I definitely grew up loving sports. I have a younger brother by 15 months who likes sports, but was never really as into it as I was. And I really identified, for whatever reason, probably because I was a daddy's girl, and my dad was a PE teacher, a coach, a referee, an umpire. So he was living and breathing sports all the time. And I hung out around him when it came time to renew his referee certificate or whatever. I would quiz him out of the little books they used to print on basketball officiating and umpiring and refereeing for football. So I was really engaged by that. He was is a diehard Lakers, Rams, Dodgers fan. And so I'm going to age myself now, but in the early 80s, they were doing well. Some of those teams were doing well. And, I was dressed, you can look at baby pictures, and I'm dressed head to toe in Rams warm up clothes. I remember when the Dodgers went on and had successful seasons, and he'd throw me this is a true story. He would throw me in the car, and I lived in Sacramento at the time, but he would throw me in the car, dress me up in Dodgers clothes, and we would drive around the streets of Sacramento while he honked the horn screaming, "Go Dodgers."
Oh my gosh.
So I remember those things vividly. But I always, again, maybe it was because I got to do something special with my father, that I've always loved sports. I grew up in golf Mecca. And I know this is going to hurt you and others who hear this, but I never really paid much attention or liked a lot of golf. I mean, I obviously went to a ton of tournaments. I went to high school in Pebble Beach, and it sounds very bougie, but I did. Went to high school in Pebble Beach. So I grew up literally on golf courses, but I was interested in college basketball and volleyball and everything but golf. Really didn't pick that up until I graduated college, moved to Pasadena, and ironically, it was the only sport that my dad and I never played. So I ended up taking lessons by myself. I was living alone in Southern California, and I thought, my father and I have played badminton over the years, tennis, bowling, you name it. Golf was like the last thing. So I came around finally, but I didn't really lean into that until later in life. But I always loved sports. I guess I can't really say that authentically, because when I was really young, my father used to pay me to practice with the basketball team because I was the only girl. So I would get $5 for every practice that I would show up at. And then he would give me $20 if I would play in a game because I was the only girl. And I was mortified that I was having to go out and play basketball with these boys, that some of whom I probably had a crush on at the time. And it was the most devastating thing to be young and be the only girl playing with boys. So my dad knew how to work it. I eventually came around, and basketball certainly became my real true love. But it's always been a part of my life.
Okay, there's so many different directions I could go right now. First of all, there's so many guys out there that are really hacked off because they never got paid to play at that age. Okay, so your dad's a really cool guy, and I know you guys are tight and all that stuff. But you've also hurt me on the golf thing. So what you're basically telling me is that you can tell me a lot more about Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Oral Hershiser, Steve Sachs, guys like that, than you could about Nicholas, Trevino, Palmer, Couples, Tiger. Oh, no. Is that fair?
I know all those guys. I was on the 18th at Pebble Beach when Tiger won. I mean, I grew up with golf, and I was around it and watched. My dad certainly watched it. Just going out and actually playing was never something that interested me in any shape or form until later in life. Now I look back and think, man, if I could do it all over again, I should have gotten into the golf industry. They're always beautiful courses. They're in beautiful locations across the world. Mm-hmm. I could have integrated sport. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer now, but at the time I was a young girl living in a tourist area in the Monterey Peninsula and hated life. And now what would I do to pause and live there with my family? It's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Hating life around Pebble Beach or Spyglass or any of those places. We've got serious issues.
I told you it sounded bougie. Yeah. I own that. Okay. I know that.
All right. So you were obviously a pretty good athlete, volleyball star, as I understand it, but then everything, it got cut short and you had a big time injury. I know that had to be brutal. You were set to go play college as a D1 athlete, correct? And then all of a sudden you got to figure out where you want to go to school because you just have to go for academics.
Yeah, so I was in Pepperdine at a basketball camp, and about 3 or 4 months prior to going to that basketball camp, I had actually dislocated my kneecap during a basketball game. which was the most painful thing, even to this day. Dislocating a kneecap is brutal. And when you live in the Monterey Peninsula and people aren't used to female athletes going down and dislocating their kneecap, my kneecap stayed dislocated for over 2 hours. And for anybody who knows medicine, all you need to do is straighten and it typically will roll back in. But it was out for a couple of hours. I recovered, ended up going to a basketball camp at Pepperdine, and anybody who's been on their campus, it's beautiful Malibu hills overlooking the ocean. They've got a lot of basketball courts outside, so they're gravel. And I was, we were a man short, so I had switched into the 3 spot. I usually played 4 or 5, and I was switched into the 3 spot. So I was guarding somebody that was definitely faster than me and pivoted the wrong way, and it was done. I mean, I knew, I looked at my coach. I knew that I had done something worse than the kneecap dislocation, and turned out that I had done what I learned was called the Terrible Triad, which is when you tear your MCL, ACL, and PCL. So there's really not much left at that point.
Yeah, there's no L's left.
No. And there's moments of your life where you can vividly remember. And that was, gosh, I was only 15 or 16 when that happened. I'm somewhere around that age. I remember sitting in the doctor's office, them bringing up the MRI, telling me and my mom and dad at the time what had happened. And then I remember the doctor and my parents walking out of the office. And I remember them having the conversation that, she's probably not going to ever be able to play again, competitively. And I sat and looked out the window, and it's just like this most surreal, ironic moment of listening to the birds chirp and trying to digest what had just been said to me. And, it definitely changed my course of life. But again, I believe everything happens for a reason, and I don't have any regrets. I wouldn't have had kind of those next steps in life, and I would have never gone to Arizona. So, it changed the course. I still have problems with it today. I've had 4 knee surgeries total on my right knee. When I was 25, it was suggested that I had my knee replaced, and I laughed at the doctor and walked out of the office and thought, well, I'll deal with it later. I'm getting close to later now, so it's going to come back to me. But yeah, when you have something like that where you get something you're so passionate about taken away, and at that young of an age, it's really hard to digest. But now I can look back, and even at the time I was like, all right, well, now I have an even bigger chip on my shoulder of what's next. What can I do to prove myself, to remain competitive? And that's really what kind of drove me into finding a place, a spot, if you will, to work in sports, so that I could still feel like I was part of a team. I was a contributor. I was competitive. And so all those things I learned playing sports and being around sports growing up really fed into the career opportunity and me continuing to push the field.
So terribly sad story. And yet you don't look back with regret. You end up at Arizona. I still can't figure out, by the way, bear down when you guys are the Wildcats. Makes no sense to me. I'll never figure that out.
There's a long story.
It's kind of like War Eagle, and Auburn has nothing to do with the Eagles. It's the Tigers. But anyway, so in that, you're a communications major. I know you changed your major a few times and all. You get an internship at the Insight.com Bowl, which is no longer a bowl, but you get an internship. And then you catch this amazing break, as I've read and researched, that the head of PR quits and you're like, I'm in. Right? Is that that just doesn't happen for an intern?
Well, the best part, I have to rewind a little bit. So I've shared, obviously, I love college basketball. I've always loved college basketball in general. So I was a freshman on campus at University of Arizona, and we had a newspaper called the Daily Wildcat that had news in it, and there was job postings. So I'm sifting through one day and casually reading, and I see this job opportunity for what I read as a basketball tournament. And so I'm like, oh, I'm in. Okay, this is pre-internet, computers, all that. So I submit a resume. I must have used a typewriter to type up a resume.
Yep.
that it was that long ago. So I submit my resume. I'm so pumped. I get a phone call. They want to interview me. So I hop in a cab and go over for this job interview. And I'm sitting down, and the guy interviewing me starts talking to me about college football. And I'm like, what is he talking about? I thought this was for a basketball tournament. So come to find out, there was a basketball tournament as part of the football game, but it was like this basketball classic associated with a bowl game.
Okay.
Now, again, I'm from Northern California. I know golf. I know basketball, kind of probably a little bit of football because maybe the Rose Bowl was on TV here and there, but it wasn't necessarily living in college football hotbed. So I got back to my dorm and I'm thinking, I don't even know what he's talking about, bowl game. I was probably 3 or 4 days later in my dorm room, got a phone call that they were going to offer me the internship. And I was so embarrassed to admit that I hadn't read the entire job description that I took the job. I went back and read the Daily Wildcat. And it, in fact, it did say it was a bowl game. And in fact, that there was a college basketball tournament associated with it. But I couldn't tell them that. So I accepted the internship because I felt guilty and shamed that I didn't read the entire job description. So that is true story how I got into college football.
That's amazing. Okay. So another funny thing is that you actually bought a book on how to write a press release. Is that true? Come on, you're like a communications person, and now you're this big time PR, marketing, brand strategist.
I had to go to the library on campus because I got told when I volunteered to oversee communications, shortly after I had to write a press release. I'm like, a press release? Again, what is a press release? So I went to the library to get a book that would instruct and teach me how to write a press release. Yes, true story.
Well, I did TV forever. Then I go to the LPGA as chief communications officer, and we got to write all these press releases. And I'll be honest, I looked over everyone, but I had an incredible staff. They wrote the press releases. I might have tweaked a few, but I still don't have that handbook. All right. I just, that's not my deal. Okay. So then from the Insight.com Bowl, I'm just going to go through the tracks here. The Fiesta Bowl, then the Rose Bowl. These are places of employment, not bowl games you attended. Okay. I want to make that clear to our listeners. These are legit jobs. The Rose Bowl. Seriously? Come on. I mean, this is an amazing track.
Yeah. The Rose Bowl probably, after I graduated, so the last Insight.com Bowl was played in Tucson in December of 1999, which is when I graduated from Arizona. The Fiesta Bowl acquired the rights to own and produce the game the next year moving forward. And fortunately, I was hired on right out of college to move to the Phoenix area to work for the Fiesta Bowl. All great experiences. I mean, learned so much of what to do and what not to do in some instances. But when I got called by the Rose Bowl, again, it was one of those things like totally honored. I don't think I realized the enormity of the opportunity. Honestly, probably until I was here in Indiana. I had just started dating my now husband, and he had mentioned something to his grandmother about like, oh, Gina's from California, and she's works for the Rose Bowl. And his grandmother, I mean, was like, I was walking on water. She was floored. Like, she works for the Rose Bowl. And, in the Midwest, the Rose Bowl is like, the mecca of sports. And so that was one moment where I was like, okay, this is a pretty big deal. And then, like I said, every year game day, for anybody who has not been to the Rose Bowl, to the stadium with the San Gabriel Mountains in the background, typically great weather. It's really magical. Yeah. Kirk Herbstreit is a good friend, and he often will quote like it is the most magical sporting venue in the world. And he's right. It's truly something. And so I look back on those moments or on game day, and I'd walk in again when nobody's in there and everything's, getting ready, and it's pretty quiet and still, and you soak in like the enormity of all of it. But that was pretty special.
Well,
that first year in particular.
I'm going to say this right now. Number one, it's on my bucket list. I've never been. So if you can ever make that happen for me, just, feel free to give me a jingle. Okay. But here's the thing, like, and you never rode in the parade, did you?
No.
Okay, cool. Because
I've never
that's kind
been
of a
to the
cool thing
parade
too,
still.
right? So that would be also on anybody's trip out there. But here's my thing, and this is kind of a trick question, and I know you're never going to answer this correctly, but I'm just going to throw it out there. See, I believe that the national championship football game should be held at the Rose Bowl every single year. Like, that should be the one venue that they just always go to because that is the place. And I know you can't say that because that wouldn't be cool, but the place looks amazing. So
yeah, you're not alone in that feeling. I mean, when we were transitioning from the BCS, the Bowl Championship Series, into the college football playoff era, that was definitely a sentiment we heard around the country, for people who have been there or for people who just tuned in every January 1. A lot of people felt that way.
Yeah. I could see the Super Bowl in Miami every year, but then see New Orleans would be upset. There'd be other cities too. So no big deal. Okay.
Yes.
Clearly you've got this trajectory that every guy who loves college football would take in a second. So you made your mark at each stop along the way. Why? How? This is how, and how important it was, because the college football playoff hired you to lead marketing and branding. And I believe first woman hired by the college football playoff. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why? What was your it? What, in your mind, what was your it factor?
That's a really good question. I mean, I pride myself on details, and from a branding perspective, even a communications perspective, I'm really truly a believer that every little piece counts. And I use this maybe terrible analogy, but I think it's really relative of, what I do wherever I'm at is like this 1,000 piece puzzle that I'm constantly working on. And on some days I work on the grass on the bottom. Some days I work on the sky or work on the house over in the corner. But when I'm done, if one piece is missing, then it's an incomplete picture. And that's how I've always approached my work and what I do. And things that some people may look at as small or insignificant or may attend they don't even notice. Deep down, I really believe that collectively all of the little experiences and all of the little pieces are what make the significant impact, the significant memory. So I know that not everybody operates in that mode and not everybody thinks that way. But I do, and I always have. And like I said, I think for me, at least, if I could identify one thing, that is the separator. That's where I've made my mark of, I care about all of the small, somewhat mundane details, because I really truly believe that without the collection of all of them, you do not have a complete product or a complete picture to present forward to make that big impact.
I was told once, every year at your review, ask your boss why they hired you, and it will always bring you back to the reason that you have the talent, the inner genius, the something special that they needed, and it'll keep you focused on what you're supposed to bring to the table. Not that you wouldn't divert or add new tools, etc., but it'll always keep you centered. By the way, statistics, that might be off by $1 or $2, but ESPN paying $608 million a year for the college football playoff. That's a big brand to oversee. That puts a lot, I'm just trying to add pressure to your job, okay? I'm trying to give you a little bit more to stress about because you said you're great in chaos. So with that, this is what people who have worked with you have said about you, Gina Lehe. She's Superwoman. And this one I like even better. She's beast. She's beast. Okay. So that's your brand. That's your brand, So what are you most proud about you? I mean, when you hear those things, what does that say?
Again, I don't know. I probably should acknowledge that I am unique in the way that I approach my work ethic, I guess. I was actually talking to some of my staff earlier today of, I don't expect everybody to operate the way that I do, nor do I think it's healthy for people to operate the way that I do. I'm very dialed in to whatever I do, whether it's personally or professionally. I just am a passionate person. I'm a competitive person by nature. So I don't doubt that people have said those things about me. But I also, like I said, I think it's important to know that whomever has been on my team, whether it's been a staff, a volunteer, I don't expect people to get in that same mode that I do. What I do expect is the work ethic. What I do expect is the dedication, because I lead by example, and I expect people who are on my team or around my team to carry those same ethics that I do, and carry that same spirit of wanting to be great, be the best as far as it is in your ability to be the best, and push the limits, push the boundaries. Being safe in communications and branding is really easy. Taking it that extra step, going another level, is not easy, because it makes people uncomfortable. And when you make any kind of change, people experience discomfort. So I really demand a lot from people who work with me and work around me, but it's because I demand that same of myself. But if I'm not leading by that example, it's really hard from a leadership standpoint to get people to buy into what you're doing if you're not showing and providing the pathway for them to do the same.
Gina Lehe is our guest on this edition of Tracks to Success. Tracks to Success is brought to you by Presentation Partners, visual storytellers passionate about connecting presenters with their audience. Okay, Sports Business Daily honored you in 2017 as a game changer in the sports industry. Game changer, specifically among women. So I'm not going to ask you why they did that. I think we know why. What I want to know is what your definition of game changer is, because you just talked about how you are as a leader, but those who might work for you, what would your definition of game changer be?
So before I go there, if you haven't noticed, I hate talking about myself more than anything.
That's why I wanted to have you on.
The entire world. It makes me not many things make me uncomfortable other than talking about myself.
Perfect. I've achieved my goal.
So thank you. Yes, success. Game changer. So that was another, surreal moment of my life, I guess, because I often don't consider myself doing anything extraordinary. I just care deeply, and I try and work my ass off. Sorry if I can't say that, but I do. And so I've never looked at those things as me being amazing, great, extraordinary, but I've also seen and learned that not everybody operates that way. So game changer for me, being forward thinking, being visionary, being not afraid to push boundaries, show people different avenues of how to get to a common goal, but not doing it along the same path or thought process that everybody else does, and getting people to buy into your vision, but be collaborative as part of that buy-in. I do not have all the answers. I don't think I know everything. I also know that without the support I've had at every one of those stops that you've mentioned, I wouldn't be here. I don't think what I'm doing is extraordinary. I used to tell people when I was in the bowl industry for so long, we had like a team manual or a participant manual, operations manual on how to do a press conference and how to do this. And, I worked with people over the years who didn't want to share ideas or collaborate with some of the other bowl partners because they didn't want to steal ideas. And I would always say, like, we're all operating from the same handbook. It's how you execute or you invent outside of that that's going to separate you, and that's going to make that difference. And that's how I believe with everything that I do, is the collaboration around the idea, whether it's my idea or somebody else's. You will not have success if you think you have all the answers. I know what I'm not good at. I know that I don't have all of the answers. I know what I don't know. And that's more important sometimes than knowing what you do know.
Well said. I got a compliment once that I didn't even realize was a compliment at first. I thought it was a slam. When I was at the LPGA, we had a big press conference introducing a new sponsor partner for a major championship with the LPGA. And at the end of this press conference, which was pretty big, pretty cool, somebody came up to me and said, "You don't do press conferences very well." And I'm thinking, oh, gee, hey, thanks a lot. And their follow-up was, "You do productions." That was pretty cool. And I was like, wow, that made me feel good because everybody on
Yeah.
our team played a role. It was choreographed. We thought of a way to do it differently. And it sounds like that's how you not only are in your role, but that's who you want to be there. Now I want to get a little personal with you and focus on the topic of being a female. How important is it? And I talked about, not following a curve, but setting one. How important is it to set a curve for women in sports, specifically in high profile leadership roles like you have?
I mean, I've got to be really honest because I get this question a lot. As you can imagine, I speak to different groups and on panels and mentor young women trying to get into sports. And, it's a very hot topic that people always want to address, like women in sports, working in sports as a woman. And I've got to be really honest that I've never looked at it that way. And maybe it's being naive, but I have always worked and wanted to prove my work in who I was as an employee or as a contributor. And if I got the job, it was because I was the best for the job.
Mm-hmm.
Bonus to them, I'm a woman. I've never walked into any door, and I never will walk into any door of saying, I'm a woman, you should hire me because you need a woman to work in X. I just don't believe that way. I'm not wired that way. And so it's hard for me to honestly have those conversations because I don't look at myself as like this pioneer. I do look at it as an opportunity to show people what opportunities exist. So in other words, when I was first starting out, and Erin Andrews, again, is a friend, love her. But everybody wanted to be Erin Andrews. And, when you talk statistics in sports and look at the number of college athletes who actually make it in the pros, well, the number of women who want to be a sideline reporter is probably even less than that. Not probably, it is less than that. And I never wanted to be in front of the camera. So my mission really throughout this career working in sports is to make sure that women understand there are other opportunities, and it's not just what you see on TV or on the sidelines. I mean, we have the same ability and capability to contribute to any setting. I have a 5-year-old daughter who, is constantly like, Mom, I didn't know that girls could play basketball. Mom, I didn't know that girls could be cooks. And I'm like, honey, women can do anything, but I thought they couldn't play football. So she's a little spunky like her mom. But the point being is like, there's opportunity. If you want to work in sports, there are so many things that you can do. And so that's really the message that I've wanted to share. And if that's being a pioneer, I guess, the one place I guess where I would edit that is being a mom. And I don't care what job it is, being a mother working in sports, being a working mom, period, that has become somewhat of a mission for me because that has pushed me to yet another level of this superwoman, tag that I've been associated with of, in anything in life, if you really want it, you'll figure out how to make it work. And the last couple of years, I've heard young women say like, well, I really want to work in sports, but I want to have a family or I want to get married. And I almost get a little like angry, like, well, you can do that. Like nobody said you can't do both of those things. You have to want it. You have to put in extra effort. And I will help you, help show you how you can do that. But I don't want anybody to walk around and not get into the sports industry because they don't feel like they can have both.
Yeah,
you can.
yeah.
But it's like anything else in life, time management, prioritizing, like you have to really hone in on those like basic skills and then you can do whatever you want, in my opinion.
Yeah. We're talking with Gina Lehe from the NCAA. Hashtag girl dad. That's me. I've got two. I love it hearing these stories. I think it's awesome. As I understand it, you actually induced labor to make sure your first was born so you didn't miss the big game. Is that true? Like, did you legitimately do that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I did. When we found out we were pregnant with my oldest, Adriana, my husband and I got the calendar out and saw that my due date was going to be like mid-December. So, you do the math at that point, like mid-December, the first college football playoff is going to be a month later, second week of January, and I went in to one of my doctor's appointments. My husband was with me, and I said, well, hey, I really need to have my baby by this date. So I'm going to want to induce. And she looked at me, she's straight faced, honey, we don't do that. Okay. We don't accommodate your schedule like that. And I looked at my husband with like shock and fear, like, what do you mean? Why can't we do that? Medically, I ended up being induced. I did ask for it. I mean, I can't hide that fact. I did ask for it. And not to the plan. I ended up having to have an emergency C-section, which was super fun. So not only did I do that, but then I went back to work less than 2 weeks later. And at one point I looked at my husband and I said, hey, are you okay with me doing this? Like, if I'm out of line here, I need you to tell me, because maybe I'm not thinking straight. And he's like, if I were you, I would do the same thing. I'm like, all right, we're good. Let's go.
Oh, you guys are a great match. Now you have a big voice in college athletics. Do you have a voice at home? How good is your messaging with those kids?
We're working on it. It's a day to day. I'm sure, as you can attest to, as your children start to get older, you see a lot of yourself in them. And then in my case, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I think, oh my God, what is to come here? Like I've got a lot on the horizon still. So it's going to be an interesting road with these 2 girls. But it's as my mother would say, if she were still alive, they are my payback of life.
In addition to hosting this podcast, Kraig leads the Kann Advisory Group, focused on elevating communication for companies and individuals. Company consulting, empowering team and individual workshops, mind-altering webinars, and Kraig's inspiring keynotes for your conference or company meeting. They're all on the menu of services. Kann Advisory helps companies clarify their message, helps professionals build and showcase their brand, and helps everyone present their best selves. So if you're the leader of a team or company looking to give your employees a game-changing one-day experience, or an individual who wants to become a speaker and presenter that gets other people talking, visit cannadvisory.com. And when you do connect, make sure to mention the Tracks to Success podcast to receive a special discount on any of the Kann Advisory services. That's cannadvisory.com. Now back to the interview.
We're talking with Gina Lehe from the NCAA, and I want to get back to the NCAA for a couple of questions. You're in the trenches every day, hired to be the managing director of brand and strategy. Is the organization's brand misunderstood by most people?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And it's really hard to create an accurate temperature on anyone's brand in today's world, because what people see is such a small sliver of reality. Through social media, you have voices that are amplified that aren't always fact-based. And so, yes, I would say that that's the case. I do think there is a brand cloud, if you will, because you have, take any school. We'll use Arizona where I went. My strong affinity is to the University of Arizona. Bear down. I'll tell you that story later. Bear down. My secondary probably would be supporting the Pac-12 conference. But not a lot of people are walking around saying, we are the NCAA, when in reality they are. It's a membership organization. So the University of Arizona ultimately reports up to the NCAA as part of the membership organization. But when you have kind of layers of brand over one another, the disconnect starts to feel even greater. And so that's one of the first things, as I mentioned, I've been here for 3 or 4 months. That's one of the first things I've started to try and tackle and digest of how do we close that gap of disassociation between the member school and the brand of the NCAA itself. And then the other part would be just the education around who the NCAA and what the NCAA does. I think there's a lot of misconception about how it operates, who the operators are. And quite honestly, I didn't know a lot of that until I came on board. So I always use myself as the temperature gauge with our staff. Like if I don't know it, and I've been working in sports for 20 plus years, there's a pretty high chance that a lot of other people don't know it either.
Gina, as you know, I spend a lot of time traveling and speaking and keynoted at the COSIDA Conference, College Sports Information Directors Association, a few years ago. You were actually in the room, which was really cool, and we got to see each other again. My message was all about pushing out the brand story, being proactive, building relationships with media. You speak as well. You've already alluded to that. What's your message? I'm going to let you be like camp counselor right now. What's your message to people looking for jobs in sports or college sports specifically?
You've got to be willing to come in and do the small things. You know, and this is not, everybody wants to say this is like the era of expectation, or whatever you want to reference right now. But I don't think that that's necessarily true to like young generation now. But you can't walk into this industry and assume title, position, or responsibility that is at the top of the chart. You just can't. And perhaps that's valid and true in any industry. I can only speak to sports because it's all I've ever worked in. But I took my job as an intern just as seriously as I take my job today as a managing director at the NCAA. I've always viewed that whatever my contribution is at that moment was an opportunity, and I was going to make the best of that opportunity, and I was going to prove to myself and who I was working for and with that I was the best at that specific opportunity. So young people who want to get into sports, you've got to be willing to do the work. And I know that sounds really simple and it sounds really easy, but I always say, start with internships, start with volunteering. If you live in an area, I'll go back in my life. If I knew this is what I was going to want to do at the time, but if you live in an area where there's golf tournaments, where there's a bowl game, call them up, send them your resume and say, hey, whatever it is I can do, I want to be available. Because when you fast forward down the road and you're applying for a job, or you're sitting down in an interview and you're talking about your background, when I hear or see young people have made an effort and have been willing to do those little things, like go work at a golf tournament when it comes into town, that tells me, okay, that's a priority for you. One of your priorities in your young life right now is to make a difference and be a contributor, no matter how small that is. And whenever you have that opportunity, seize it, make the best of it, because the other part of all of those little opportunities of volunteering, internships, etc., is the networking. And that's the piece where I probably should have used that as a game changer moment for me too. My relationships are the most important thing that I have worked my entire career on, from being an intern to today. We have all of these amazing tools with social media and people thinking they have thousands and millions of friends across the country. But if you can't get in a room with somebody and have an authentic, real conversation, you have no relationship. So the relationship piece is paramount to being successful in any setting, but most importantly, sports. It is a very, very small world. People who have passion and love this industry will stay around, that they will move to different locations, as you and I both have. But you can always come back to those relationships. So when you have an opportunity to go intern or volunteer for an event, you are starting to build your toolbox of network, and that network will never shut down.
Couple of things before I let you go. You are already officially multiple times on record as saying you live comfortably in chaos. I always say to people, we can't control chaotic situations. They just happen. What we can control is how we react to chaotic situations, how we carry ourselves, because most people don't pay attention to you when everything's going great. But when it hits the fan, so to speak, all eyes are on leaders. How do they act? How do they walk? How do they talk? How do they carry themselves, etc.? You've already told me that you don't consider yourself a trailblazer. I'll disagree with that because I think you've had an amazing run and set a gold standard for women in college athletics at that level. All those things are great traits. But if I think I know you based on this, you think there's room for improvement. So where can Gina improve?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's always room for improvement. And as I said earlier, I'm very comfortable telling people what I don't know and where and when I need help. I try and stay current as I can, and realize that in our industry in particular, technology has forced us to evolve at a much more rapid pace than other professions may have. So I need to read up on trends, study trends, lean on people around me who are more current than I am to talk through with me why something might make sense, how it may be applicable to what we're doing at that time. But absolutely. I mean, as I said, I don't think that I do anything extraordinary, but I care deeply, and that care translates into making sure that I'm keeping whatever I'm doing relevant and whatever I'm working on relevant and relatable, in particular with communications and the NCAA and servicing so many member institutions and student athletes. You've got to stop and pause and realize that the world continues to move, even if you're still kind of stuck in a certain space. And that requires that you're continually educating yourself on how processes work and how tools and resources can aid in that advancement.
You know what? You were a lot of fun when you hosted that panel discussion in New York City a few years ago, and I got to sit there and take questions from you. But it's a lot more fun to be able to ask you the questions because you're really fun to interview. Gina, I cannot thank you enough. This podcast is called Tracks to Success. Your journey has been really fun, and I wish you nothing but the best. The NCAA, college athletics, very fortunate to have you with a big voice and a big purpose.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it. Glad our paths crossed years ago in New York City, and I know they will continue to do so.
In our conversation, Gina talked about how chaos is actually something she feels comfortable with. And that leads me to my one last thing. If you want to be an influencer, realize the importance of preparedness and being organized so that when things get a little crazy, you're the one who's getting noticed for all the right reasons. Crisis is really just a word, and if you allow it to overwhelm or suffocate you, people will see it. Leaders find a way to carry on with calm and stay focused on the goal while not being overrun by a situation that swallows up others. In my workshops, we talk a lot about the traits of executive presence, which ties into how someone carries themselves in the good and bad moments. Staying one step ahead of the next potential challenge in your organization gives you a huge advantage over others looking to become leaders who can be counted on. So think about what you'll say. Think about how you'll say it. And most importantly, how you want to be viewed by others when it matters most. I hope these thoughts and the things we discussed in this interview will help put you on the track to success. And if you have a guest you think belongs on this podcast, tweet at us. The handle is @TracksToSuccess. Until next time, I'm Kraig Kann. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Tracks to Success, brought to you by Presentation Partners, visual storytellers passionate about connecting presenters with their audience. Don't forget to subscribe to the show for more great interviews and thoughts on reaching your highest personal and professional summit. You can follow Kraig on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @Kraig Kann. And for exclusive Tracks to Success content and news about our upcoming guests, you can find Tracks to Success on Twitter. It's @Tracks to Success.